Welcome to episode 194 of Trek Live. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be diving into another one of our reoccurring topics, a character spotlight that I don't believe we talked about before, but we'll get into that once we get into the main topic. But first off, how you doing this morning, Bill?
Doing well. Excited to be back. It was a nice break. We had a really good time on a Trek After Dark hangout last night with some of our friends in the Discord server. Watched an episode of Lower Decks, hung out, caught up, talked about everything going on in the world of Star Trek, and I felt like that was a cool way to kick off 2022. And excited to get back into the routine a little bit. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be back as well. It feels like a long time since we talked Star Trek properly here on Trek Live. With that being said, my rewatch recap isn't going to be anything because I'm currently just on a hiatus from my rewatch, so I don't have anything to really report. But Bill, do you have anything?
I do. I'm about halfway through season 6, a little more than halfway through. I've watched the first 16 episodes of season 6 of Voyager. So Equinox Part 2 through Collective. Season 6 starts off pretty darn strong. There's quite a few episodes in that run that I really love. I can't remember if maybe I touched on it the last time we were here. Because I can't remember exactly when I watched it. Bards of the Dead is a huge favorite of mine. Right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Episode 3 of the season. Tinker Tenor, Dr. Spy, I think is great. Riddles is a nice little episode. You've talked a lot about Dragon's Teeth is in that run.
Yeah.
I think that's a really ambitious, big scope science fiction story. One Small Step, Pathfinder, blink of an eye, like all in this first half of the 6th season. Voyager really kind of firing on all cylinders. Yeah, hitting these, more ambitious science fiction backbones that I think that they really embraced as sort of the identity of that show, and really landing on some of those ideas with those episodes, having cool ideas while exploring the characters really nicely, giving the cast cool things to do. Really good. I like Memorial. I think that's a really kind of underrated episode. It's dark and we were talking last night.
Sticks with you.
Yeah, it does. It's we last night during our Trek After Dark hangout, we touched on a little bit of like how Voyager has quite a few of these episodes that are like very draining, and you almost feel like you need a shower when they're over. They make you feel dirty, and like you've really been through the ringer with characters like The Shoot, and it's the other one that came up. It was kind of in that ballpark. You remember The Shoot and Juggernaut? We were talking about kind of the same thing. Like really makes you feel like you're right in those nasty environments with the characters. And Memorial is kind of similar with some of those flashback scenes and into the war scenes. Really successfully kind of puts you in that time and place and that feeling. So really enjoying Voyager, enjoying being back into the one show at a time zone for the foreseeable future. Was interlocking shows for a while there, but a lot of good stuff in the beginning of season 6. And instead of your rewatch recap, what we've been doing here is kind of looking at the surveys of the week.
Top 5 movies.
Top 5 movies is this week. Okay. So I would love to take your choices and throw them in here if you're ready. I'm ready.
Yeah, I think I can. We talked about that last night as well. I think my first would be 09.
Okay.
Second would be Voyage Home. Third would be probably First Contact. Oof. Fourth would be Wrath of Khan, probably. And rounding out the top 5, probably couldn't leave it out, is Beyond.
Beyond.
Right
Nice.
now, there's two Kelvin Timeline movies in that top five, but
Okay.
yeah, five, six would probably be close to
Mm-hmm.
that 5 or 6 range as far as my top five goes. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon to have more than one Kelvin timeline on a ballot. I've got 54 of them so far, and that's happened. There was one person, I can't remember exactly who. I know Melody's in the room, and if you're listening and this was you, I apologize and take credit. Somebody in relatively recent, like the last handful of ballots I got, I believe, voted for all three of the Kelvin movies
nice.
on their ballot. But yeah, a lot of interesting choices. I'll be honest, this is going much more kind of chalk than I expected it to. I thought it would get a little bit. I was expecting maybe a surprise or two, but the top heavy, pretty clear victors at this point are what you would expect they would be.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Especially with the movies, and it's such a smaller sample size. I definitely get that.
Yeah, the movies, I feel like it's really interesting. Like, to me, the most interesting thing about these results, which will come out, I usually put them out on like Tuesday night. I'll keep it out there, and the more votes, the better. So if people are watching this and haven't done it yet, head over to my Twitter, TrekFan4387, and take a look and share your top five. The more ballots, the better the data is. Outside of that top 4 or 5, like which of the less upper tier, kind of across the board movies, like where do they fall? Like, how do you stack them with the kind of support? It kind of is more, to me, is probably the more interesting data point to kind of look at than the obvious ones that are kind of running away with it.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap this up on Tuesday, put the results out, and then starting on Friday, with Friday's next survey, we're kind of getting into the new stuff. Discovery Season 1's the next one. It'll be Discovery 1, 2, Picard Season 1, Lower Decks Season 1. So it's going to be in the order that they came out, and into the more new stuff, which will be interesting too. Kind of similar to the movies, it's a smaller sample size. It's not 26 or 24 to choose from. It's going to be like 13 or 10. But the cool thing about these seasons, I think, is there hasn't been as much time for the clear favorites to kind of like cement their status, and for people's brains to kind of go to the classics. I don't know that we've had enough time for some of those things to settle into place. So there should be interesting results. I'm expecting on a lot of those surveys with where people's favorites are.
Yeah, it should be tough because this new stuff is a little bit more serialized, so it's hard to just pick a clear cut favorite episode without picking another one. So it should be fun.
It's gonna be interesting. Yeah. Topic of the week. We're ready to pivot into Ezri Dax.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive into it.
Cool.
Yeah, I think this topic works great because you and I just, in the past couple of months, just finished Deep Space Nine, so it's kind of a fresh take, fresh look at Ezri Dax, who only had one season in Deep Space Nine, but I think if you ask any Star Trek fan out there, she makes an impact, for better or worse. So I think we should just dive into it.
Yeah, it's really a unique animal with Star Trek. It's almost kind of like in these seasons of newer Star Trek, especially in Discovery, for example, you get these instances where there might be a sort of very prominent character who's kind of isolated to a single season. Captain Pike in season 2, Spock in season 2, like these sort of anomalous Captain Lorca in season 1. Like these characters kind of come in for a season and have a really big impact on the story of that season, and then there's not really anything else. This is the closest to that phenomenon that I think we ever got in that initial era of Star Trek, where somebody really impacts one season, and it's sort of an accident, with Jadzia departing and then having one season to go, and the I guess the dilemma of the for the show is, do we replace the character, bring in the new character, do this thing with Ezri, or do we just kind of leave leave well enough alone, let Jadzia go, and kind of just keep the dynamic as is with sort of a missing piece. And they obviously chose to bring a new Dax symbiont in, introduce the character, and because of introducing a new character into that season, they had to dedicate time to letting that character marinate into the ensemble and impact the story. So there's a lot of Ezri Dax in season 7. So I think it's an important conversation piece, especially for, like you said, both of us having pretty recently wrapped up Deep Space Nine and having not just watched season 7, but the show as a whole, and taken that journey and gotten to the end and had the Ezri Dax, experience, which is, I think, kind of polarizing. I think some people are really big fans of Ezri. Some people are, think that season 7 might suffer a little bit for that, like late introduction to the cast, and having to dedicate a lot of time to pushing that character up and to maybe catch the character up a little bit to be a part of the ensemble for the late run. Where do you you've kind of indicated some things as we've gone through season 7, but how do you feel about the choice? Are you glad that they brought her in?
Nah, I'm not really happy about the choice. I just, and this is nothing against the character or the actor, really. It's just, I feel like they had so much going on at the time that adding an additional new character and having to spend episodes introducing and moments with other characters trying to work that in. I always forget when I go through season 7, I always forget how much Ezri Dax is actually in there. Some really great episodes, some that I could not really care for, but the overall choice, to answer your question, Bill, to bring that character in, I'm not the biggest fan of, just because they had so much going on and so many storylines that they could have touched on, and they had already had so many established characters already. It was just kind of tough for me to get on board early with a decision like that.
I'm kind of in the middle. I like some of the things that the introduction of the character does for the existing cast. I think Michael Dorn gets some interesting things to play in season 7 with the discomfort of what does this mean? I think his unique experience with it being Jadzia was a spouse. There was an intimacy there, and having sort of a new version pop up does allow Worf some interesting new notes to play. I think his worldview and the things that are important to him conflict naturally and make sense with the sort of position he's put in with Ezri kind of coming into the fold. I think that all feels natural and a logical place to put the character. But I do, one of my favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine is Rejoined. I really like what that does, and sort of the big piece of conflict in that story is the when you move on, when a host, when the symbiont goes to a new host, the new host is not supposed to interact with people or hosts. It's kind of muddy, because what that episode is really talking about is like, if I have a host and you have a host, and if we were in a romantic relationship, when we go to our next hosts, we're not supposed to reconnect, right? Like that. It's kind of it does feel specifically like.
But we don't really get that.
Trill are not supposed to do that.
We don't really get that in season 7, though. Like
no. Ezri, I don't think is violating the letter of that law, because she's not reconnecting with other Trill symbionts in new hosts, but she is kind of. It's sort of the conflicts that arise from Ezri coming back to Deep Space Nine do sort of like underline that concern that the Trill have. Like these are the kinds of things that are going to come up when you don't move on and live a new life when you go to the new host. So I have mixed feelings about Ezri doing that, and the show putting Ezri in a position to do that. but I do, like I said, I like some of the things it gives Cisco and Worf, definitely specifically. But I agree with you that some of the episodes that focus heavily on Ezri, things like Prodigal Daughter, things like After Image, like they're episodes that I think are kind of just okay and feel like obligatory. I think you had mentioned at one point, like they almost feel like season 1 episodes, season 2 episodes, because they're so sort of like basic building block of a character stories, that this show specifically feels so far beyond. In season 7, it feels so outside of its personality at this point in the show. It's so established with its cast and its characters, and everybody's so complicated and is so deep into their arcs that to have that, building block phase for a new character does sort of feel odd, oddly mixed, I would say. That I struggle a little bit with that. So I really do have mixed feelings about the success rate of bringing her into the fold. Cyber Honey mentions Field of Fire was good. I do like that. I think that's a cool episode that we've mentioned before. I think unlocks a lot of, along with Equilibrium, a lot of the things that we get in Discovery later on with how the Trill can connect with previous hosts and the sort of rituals and methods that they have to have those connections if they need to or if they want to, and the dangers of that. That feels valuable, and I think that explores the Trill idea pretty well, in a very specifically Deep Space Nine way, with the noir leaning, with murder mystery. So there are good things for sure. I wouldn't want to paint with a broad brush and say for myself that it's a failure and that she, it doesn't bring anything to the show. I think there are some good moments, some good episodes, some good character interactions that come from it. But I am mixed.
Yeah, I mean, a positive for me is that she gets the symbiont and doesn't just fall in line to a new host. It's a process. She's trying to process all these new things, and she feels confused and all these things. Like I appreciate that, and they kind of play into like she didn't have any training, she didn't have any of this. Like she played into that. Well, she just got all this thrown in her lap. So I think she. It's nice to be able to see that, where it's not just like a throwaway line and she's the character she is. It takes episodes and moments with other characters to be able to establish who she's going to be as Ezri Dax, which we kind of get, I feel like, in my head canon in season 1 and season 2, like Bill talked about. I think there is a not just for the actor, obviously, to learn the character, but that type of character, it takes time to develop, and that's why I really like kind of the Trill sci-fi concept of a host and a symbiont, and I think that's really cool. But yeah, that's one positive that I see really early on. Like it is kind of jarring in those first couple episodes when Ezri Dax comes back with Cisco, but now that I think about it, it kind of makes sense, because I think when you're going through something that traumatic, you go to your core people, and I think for that symbiont, Cisco is his core people, so I really like that.
You're totally right, and actually that kind of unlocks. We've talked a lot about in those early episodes of Deep Space Nine, especially the way Jadzia feels so different than what she ultimately becomes, and you've always kind of chalked it up in your headcanon, as you've said, to Jadzia is newly joined and hasn't yet sort of found that equilibrium of combining all of these previous experiences and hosts and finding a true path for herself as Jadzia. And in an episode like in season 2, there's Playing God, where Jadzia is potentially kind of signing off on a new initiate, right? And there's a lot of qualifications to that. It's a difficult process, and there are a lot of people who get rejected for that. And there's a real standard for who can do this. And I feel like since Jadzia was accepted as an initiate, we got to see what somebody who was accepted got to deal with in those early years of trying to settle. In that first couple of seasons, where Jadzia is much more kind of stoic. She's essentially a different person. And you can, from a production standpoint, chalk it up to it's the actors kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the writers figuring it out. Who's this character? What are the strengths of the...
Yeah.
All those things are true. But And I agree with you, and I have the same thought in with the headcanon that it's Jadzia sort of finding her way and finding her comfort zone. So you see on one end a person like Jadzia who was given the okay to go through this process, figuring that out. And in season 7, you get somebody who doesn't have those qualifications and isn't a natural fit for a joining, dealing with the same things, and it's sort of an answer to playing God. Like, this is what happens if we just give a symbiont to anybody. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to give this person problems. It's going to be a problem for the symbiont because I think that's successful too. I think it does kind of pay off that idea that this isn't for everybody, and that the sort of small segment of the troll population gets to do this for good reason, and getting to see that in a way that's not just like a one-off guest star coming in who's newly joined and is all wacky and crazy, and Jadzia gets to work through it with them. Like, so instead of that, we get to see Ezri have to go through it for an extended period of episodes, and it takes time.
But in such a shorter amount of time, it's just it's just amazing that that whole process, it just feels very bang bang bang, and then it just, I don't know, it's just interesting when you kind of look at Jadzia's kind of experience where she was trained, she went through the program and all these things, and where Ezri didn't really do that, and she just yeah. It's crazy that it's just in an accelerated timeline. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and we're kind of getting in I know some of the people in the chat are higher and lower on Discovery as a show, granted, but in Discovery with Adira, we're getting a little bit more of an extended, I think, maybe not an episode count, but over a period of time, Adira dealing with the ramifications of being joined and their experience with working through adjusting as an unnatural choice for a joining. Adira's not even a trill. Like, there are complications to this choice, and there are things being paid off and difficulties with that process. Where with Ezri, it's a more condensed period of time that we're getting that. But we do get it. I mean, those early episodes, Ezri's a mess. She's confused. Yeah. She doesn't know which memory she's dealing with, what she actually likes herself, and what Curzon liked, and what Jadzia liked. Like, all those things are kind of nicely woven into episodes that are about Ezri and episodes that aren't, and like little B-story scenes and quick throwaway moments. And I do like the exploration of that idea. I think that's successful and pays off a lot of the trill stuff we get in Deep Space Nine throughout the show.
I also do like that Ezri is a counselor. It's kind of ironic that she's going to deal with all these emotions and feelings and things. But I think it's a missed opportunity because, she's training to be a counselor. I think one of the worst places to go is right in the middle of a war. So I think it's a perfect place for a counselor. These people are going through a lot, and it's hard because some of our characters here in Deep Space Nine aren't technically Starfleet, so they can't. I don't know. It gets weird with. I'm sure that they would have been fine with them visiting a counselor, but it's just and some aren't even members of the Federation, so it's makes for an interesting kind of thing to think about. But also, I think it was kind of a missed opportunity where we could have had some good some interactions with this counseling sessions and working through these really dark topics that they kind of go through in Deep Space Nine, which we're now kind of getting with Culber and stuff with
Discovery.
So yeah,
I agree. I'm very happy that, and I kind of always was, that they made her a counselor. I think one of the common knocks on TNG that I remember even as a kid was, counselor on the bridge, it's kind of silly. I never completely agreed with that. I always kind of viewed it as, Deanna Troi has unique skill sets and has a unique relationship with the captain as a trusted advisor, and captain can have whoever the heck he wants on the bridge. And so I never really had that issue. But to me, it makes total sense for there to be a counselor on these missions and on these outposts where people are working every day. And you would hope, I think we're already kind of making some progress in the 21st century with putting a better emphasis on mental health and making sure people get their needs taken care of and get to talk through things and, get the assistance they need on that front. It's not just physical health, it's mental health. Whether it's professional athletes or, professional people in any way like that's already becoming more of a, an accepted thing to explore and need. And by the 24th century, you're darn right. When people go out into a, years long deep space mission away from everything that they've ever known, a counselor might be a good thing to have on board, So I like that Ezri's a counselor, that we get to unlock that piece of Deep Space Nine. There's at least in Hard Time, they kind of imply that there's a counselor off screen on Deep Space Nine already.
Yeah.
Bashir keeps telling O'Brien, make sure you're, keeping your appointments after he gets out of the, the jail sentence that he had to do in Hard Time. But actually getting to explore those things and have a character on screen in that role, I think was a good move, especially like you said, given that it's wartime and people have traumas and difficulties and losing friends and all those things.
And she goes toe to toe with Garrick.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'd call that a counseling session, but that's just I just remember kind of a powerful scene where this really quiet kind of it's she's almost like the complete opposite. She's full of emotion. She has emotion. She explores her emotions and feelings and things like that with being a counselor. Where, yeah, Garrick is not that. So, good scene there.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. Saber Honey mentioned something that you kind of touched on. She liked the Cisco Dax bond. Trump said he trilled joining misgivings like that.
Yeah.
Seeing that bond move from Curzon to Jadzia to Ezri and stay strong and not miss a beat is a nice story beat and key piece of Deep Space Nine. I think that relationship.
Yeah, it's just a mark of like the Dax symbiont. It's the Dax symbiont. Just having its people and even different hosts. That friendship still lasts. So yeah, that's really cool that they explore that and kind of touch on that early on, very early on.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
And especially because if we remember, Cisco's going through a lot as well, so they're kind of not in the same boat, but in the same. A lot of things are changing, and then there's a lot of pressure, and then things like that. So I think it's good. I'm glad that I know it's really jarring when Ezri shows up at the end of that episode. But I think as time goes on, for me, and that's what Trek Live does, is it helps me talk through feelings about characters, storylines, things like that, and I can confidently say now that we're talking about Ezri Dax. I wasn't as hot on the character, but now as we're kind of talking through this, it's definitely changing my perspective a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there's a lot to digest because of how much there is. I think because of how emphasized the Ezri character is in this season. Another big episode with the counseling perspective, I think, is It's Only a Paper Moon with Nog. I think it's that's a key component, I think, to exploring that story and giving Nog the space to go through that. I think that we have a counselor on board that's an established character and is somebody that's on screen and is expected. There are some nice scenes between Nog and Ezri and the rest of the crew as Nog is dealing with his trauma the way that he is. So having that counselor on board and having a person in that role in a comfortable way, an established character that we know, grants the show kind of a permission to go down that road and have stories like that told. And as well as that episode is, as well as that episode does it. So I think there are big successes along the way. I kind of mentioned After Image is kind of not a misfire, but just kind of okay. But you're right. I think that that's her going toe to toe with Garrick, and Garrick is such a dynamic character, and is so sort of dominant in so many of his scenes and in so many of his interactions with other people. Seeing the shoe kind of get flipped onto the other foot there, with him being forced into a position of being more vulnerable and not necessarily having the upper hand in some of those interactions, and unlocking a different kind of relationship for Garrick is a positive for that character so late in the game. It gives an added color and a different texture to that character to have a relationship like that with Ezri. So there are definite successes here, and like I said, I stand by the Worf. I think that's successful. Some people may disagree, having Worf have to deal with that, and then have that thread kind of pull through to the end, that last run of episodes in Penumbra until Death Do Us Part and things like that. Like I think that's a valid way to go, and I think there are some cool things that they get to do with the Worf character that are net positives for the show. Because of Ezri.
Yeah, it keeps Worf relevant, right? I know that there's a lot of wartime stuff that we get to explore with the Worf character. His relationship with Martok and the Klingons and all that. It's definitely a pillar of Deep Space Nine, but also, with Ezri there, it keeps him definitely. Some good stuff to work through and some interesting kind of dilemmas. It makes you think, like, what would you do in that kind of situation? He gets to explore grief and it's hard to process loss, and it's good stuff.
Yeah. Jeff asks an interesting question. That's kind of an aside, but a really interesting thing to kind of chew on a little bit. He thinks Roddenberry may have been opposed to having a counselor. There are examples of him saying humans would have been evolved beyond certain needs in things like the motion picture novelization that he had a big hand in, and the development of the Next Generation. There are things like, you're right, Jeff. There's some contradictory stuff, which is pretty common, I think, with some of the Roddenberry ideology at times. He was kind of opposed to an episode like The Bonding because he felt like people would be able to more quickly move beyond loss and death, and that there shouldn't be such an emphasis put on like a young kid losing his parents, which is kind of crazy. I think like that, I don't know, really adds up. But Next Generation is his show, and not only did he put a counselor on the show, he put a counselor sitting literally as like Picard's right hand, or left hand. I think you're right. There's some mixed messaging within the framework of like the Next Generation, with how badly counseling would be needed, and should humanity be kind of moved beyond certain needs. But
I go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you.
I guess you're right. There are some contradictory things about it, but I also find it hard to believe because I think also logs are such a pillar of Star Trek, and that to me is more like a journal, and having the crew member and writers use it to kind of set up the story and things like that. But to me, it's more of, okay, you need a journal to be able to talk things out, even if you're just talking to yourself, to the computer. And I think that's just a element of space travel that's just, they can't get past that. They have to have an outlet like that somehow, and I think the counselor is just an extension of that. And I don't think it would make for a very interesting TV show if we had evolved past all that. So that's sort of that was the writer's conflict on the Next Generation, especially when Roddenberry was still around, that he would kind of often try to veto stories that had those kinds of dramatic elements, because he would say, by the 21st century, humanity would have evolved past these kinds of things like grief and loss and, getting over these things. And of course, a writer for a TV show in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s would say, well, aren't we doing a drama? Like, where does drama come from? It comes from feelings and emotions and tension and conflict. So that's an age-old Star Trek struggle. And I think Ezri, kind of bringing it back to Ezri Dax on Deep Space Nine, I do feel like one of the better things, like maybe for Star Trek as a whole, that Ezri might accomplish from a big picture standpoint is
bringing Ezri onto the show and kind of formalizing the placement of a counselor in the crew dynamic after Deanna Troi kind of cements that Deanna Troi wasn't a one-off. Like that wasn't like a, that's just a Next Generation thing. It's an Enterprise D thing. Like this kind of settles a sort of debate, maybe a little bit, that ships, space stations, long-range missions, long-term missions have a counselor, and that's something that's sort of to be expected. And then that kind of evolves into, it makes it easy to think like Voyager was going to be on like a short-term mission. They weren't expecting to be out there for super long, so they didn't have a counselor. They probably could have used one, like a more formally trained counselor, given where they ended up and the kind of mission they ended up being on. And you get things like in Discovery now later on, there's a counselor on the ship that is dealing with all these things. So I think it kind of settled that piece of like the standard for these crews, and the need for a counselor on a ship, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do we think about another sort of big character interaction that Ezri sort of shakes up? In the early part of Deep Space Nine, pre-Worf, the flirtation for Dax was always Bashir, and it was always sort of a maybe, but probably not kind of a dynamic, right? Like it always felt like he wanted it more than she did, and it never was probably going to happen. That's always what I sort of take away from it when I watch it. She flirtation more than the actual idea. She thinks of him as a friend and has fun with it, but it wasn't going to go anywhere. And now with Ezri, it does. Like that choice to play it that way. Do you like that? Do you think that was a good move? Do you have neutral?
I'm neutral with it. I don't particularly mind them going down that road, but I would just rather have them have kept it separate and just its kind of own thing, and don't even really think about the past, because I feel like there was a line that was like, or maybe Jadzia said this. It was like, if it wasn't Worf, it would have been you. Like something like that. Like
Ezri
said that.
Ezri says it.
I just don't even bring that into it. Just make this whole organic thing just between them two. But I can kind of get behind it. I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think a relationship, it being romantic, also has to have some elements of just friendship. So I can get on board with them being really good friends. Obviously, that's throughout the whole show. Dax and Bashir, whether it be Jadzia or Ezri, friends. But I don't particularly like the just dwelling on the past and what happened with the past. I just would just rather have it be its own thing. What about you?
I'm kind of mixed on it. I don't really have an issue. I think it's fine. I always kind of look at that scene and go, man, I can't figure out if that's like a nice thing to say or a mean thing to say to somebody. Like, does somebody want to know they were like sort of the runner-up?
Yeah,
like that's kind of like messed up. But it's a neat little sort of cute tie-up, I guess, because it does kind of go back to the very beginning. Like right as soon as you meet those two characters, there's sort of a hint that maybe there's something there. Something could develop over time. And there's sort of that detour when Worf comes along, and it's such a clearly kind of perfect pairing for Dax based on the way they were playing Dax at that point of the show, with her, love of Klingon history and culture, and the more rugged, rogue element of that character kind of would fit a nice yin and yang for Worf. To sort of have your cake and eat it too, get to do the Worf thing, but also sort of pay off those early days of Deep Space Nine where they were kind of playing with the idea of a Dax Bashir relationship. Is I can understand the temptation and why they chose to do it. But I'm trying to think. Obviously, I think the characters that Ezri had impacted the most, I think we've touched on: Sisko, Worf, Garrick, Bashir, right? Like I feel like those are the ones that she has the most consistent interaction with Nog, even with It's Only a Paper Moon. She's got some good scenes with the in the Siege of AR 558. She kind of becomes friends with the engineer guy on that mission.
Yeah.
In the wartime, she's got some cool stuff there.
She doesn't really hit it off much with Kira, I feel like.
Not as much as Jadzia.
As Jadzia.
That doesn't ever really become a thing.
And Kira, like, I think she gets promoted by this point, and she's got a lot going on, so I definitely get that, but...
Most of the Season 7 Kira stuff, I think, is pretty Odo heavy. I think that character relationship is such a prominent feature of that season, too, that's where that character sort of resides in the character, in the dynamics of the cast. Like those two characters kind of play off each other a lot. Where I think Ezri, it's mostly just kind of rattling through it in my mind. It's Cisco, it's Worf from a distance for a lot of it, and more close up at the end, and Bashir and Nog, I think, are the big ones.
Yeah.
Jeff says it would have been cool to have more episodes with her for one season. We got to know her pretty well, which is a credit to DS9's writing. I think TNG, maybe we wouldn't have had as much insight into her. Yeah, Deep Space Nine was so good at the time, especially late in the game. It was kind of old hat for them to juggle a lot of things at once. They were very good at weaving character moments and little beats into even episodes that wouldn't focus heavily on a given character to keep arcs moving. And I think having places, all the shows have, they have 10 Forward and Mess Hall and lounges, places to hang out. But Deep Space Nine spent so much time in Quarks and on the promenade and these common areas that allow for like batches of characters to be together in more casual settings that I think we get a lot of opportunities for things like that. But to be fair, there are a lot of, like we've kind of touched on since the beginning of our talk here, that Deep Space Nine Season 7 does dedicate a lot of episodes to Ezri. You kind of count After Image, Field of Fire, Prodigal Daughter. She's heavily featured in like the beginning of that 10-episode arc at the end in Penumbra and Till Death Do Us Part and Strange Bedfellows. Like she's part of the major thrust of those stories, and they were really part of that arc. She's It's Only a Paper Moon, certainly primarily a two-hander with Nog and Vic, but Ezri I would say is number 3 on that.
Yeah, she's right there.
On that call, yeah.
Yeah.
The Emperor's New Cloak, even you get Mirror Ezri. Which is, not my favorite thing, but she's there, and they even do that. Like, they really do make sure they do dedicate a lot of the percentage of episodes in Season 7 to, like we were saying at the beginning, kind of propping the character up and making sure that she's established enough and ingrained into the dynamic enough to be able to run alongside these heavyweight characters, series regulars and recurring as the show's going to its finale. I think they felt daunted by not having that be a weak link in terms of who's interesting and who has a lot of meat on the bones. With just so much there and so many characters that have so much to bring to the table and so much to resolve.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But anything about Ezri and O'Brien's relationship? I haven't seen DS9 in a long time. I don't think there's too much of that. I think when I think of O'Brien and Ezri, most of it has to do with in that late run.
Yeah.
O'Brien kind of needling Bashir about the budding romance. Like, not so much about Ezri specifically, but it's more about O'Brien and Bashir's sort of reaction to the possibility that might actually happen.
Yeah.
And Prodigal Daughter, good point, Cyber Honey. And Prodigal Daughter, there is a connection there through the mission. Ezri goes to look for O'Brien, and they are together on that. But it's a pretty cool, cold, like, there's not a lot of opportunity for, chumminess on that.
Yeah. It just seems like a relationship, like, built on, they just serve together.
Yeah, they're on a mission together.
Not,
and
feels like any more than that.
Right. Anything else on Ezri, specifically, before we kind of maybe tie it up more broadly?
I don't think so.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I'm still kind of in the mushy middle. Like, it's so...
Yeah.
part of like you can't. I don't. When you make the choice to introduce her into the show, if that's the choice that's made, I feel like they did the only thing they could do, which is to do the work to perch the character up and to make sure that the character can stand alongside this dawning, crew of other characters. And the only way to do that is to get to dedicate a lot of time. I think the more interesting question to really chew on, which is probably a whole different conversation because it's sort of a writer's room kind of a thing that we've done a couple of times, is what would a season 7 look like if there is no Ezri Dax? Like if the Dax story from a specific standpoint, like for that character ends with Jadzia, like wherever the Dax symbiont goes, it's not on Deep Space Nine. And we're just left with the loss and the characters that are so closely tied to Dax, like Cisco, like Bashir, like Worf, are left to just deal with the loss. And how does that impact, and the lack of an Ezri Dax character impact the way season 7 may have played out? And is that something we might have preferred in theory? That's a different conversation, I think, than the one we're having here. I think we're talking about Ezri and what she did for the show. I think we kind of successfully hit on those things. But maybe that's a discussion for another time.
I think we should maybe chalk that up and hit on it maybe another time. But yeah, I think you're right. It's my mind's already racing with possibilities and things, and how different season 7 and season 7 to begin with is a talking point. But when you add a new character, was it because the show felt tired going into season 7? I'm not sure. But yeah, I guess it was just because they just a character or an actor had left. That's why they had to bring in a new character. But
right.
Yeah. I guess we have some homework to do. Trek Live homework.
Think
about how it would be different.
I think there will be a studio part 2 to this down the road, with maybe a writer's room kind of discussion about sort of how would a different version of season 7 play out with different choices made. Cyber Honey mentions like Shadows and Symbols, episode 2 of the season. That's with Worf and company going off to sort of, win a battle in honor of Jadzia to send her off to Sto-vo-kor. That's kind of the thing with Worf. Like Worf, I think, was ready to move on. And, being a Klingon and with his worldview and his ideology and his sort of, way to process things, I think he was more equipped to handle losing Jadzia, as long as it was an honorable death, whether it was in battle originally or doing what he did in Shadows and Symbols. Yeah. I think he was ready to kind of cut bait and be able to move forward with that. Then he was like that. The difficulty for Worf is that, what is this? Like, is she dead or is she not? Like, what if she's not really dead? Then where are we? And what does it all mean? Like, that confusion just is what gets Worf. Not the fact that she's gone. If he believes that she died honorably and she's in Sto-vo-kor, I think he grieves and he suffers and he deals, but he's okay. And I think he can process that and move forward. So that presents a very different for Worf's character in season 7.
Yeah.
Without Ezri.
But I think that Worf is uniquely equipped to be able to handle loss, because I feel like in the past he's dealt with a bunch of loss. So
yes,
that's where I think it. I guess you're right. It makes for an interesting little dynamic conundrum that Worf is in.
Yeah. Jimmy 77 kind of just laying down the gauntlet with his verdict. He's glad they kept the Dax personality. That's kind of what we're looking for. Like, I'm still, I don't even know that I can give a definitive yes.
I'm not sure.
I'm happy with it. I mean, my biggest issues with, and I love season 7 as a whole, but the biggest vulnerabilities to season 7 for me don't come in the form of Ezri, in large part when I'm watching it. To be honest, I struggle more with some of the things they do to cut, maybe like the way that sort of plays out, than I even do with Ezri. I could take or leave some of the episodes, but by the end of the season, I've always kind of grown to like Nicole DeBoer, who played Ezri Dax, and I've grown to like some of the character dynamics that are offered up by her presence. So I guess I'm edging toward a thumbs up, maybe. But it's not a definitively. And maybe I'll have a stronger opinion when we do our sort of pseudo part 2.
Yeah.
And think about,
Also,
what an alternative version of season 7 might have looked like.
Also think about what the show would look like with Ezri Dax instead of just Dax.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do with this.
Yeah.
You can flip things around and think about alternative possibilities. But and it's a unique, because I think the difference between this and other sort of character movements that we've had, like Kess leaving and 7 of 9 coming on, Worf coming on to Deep Space Nine, this creates this weird anomalous thing where it's a single season at the end of a show. Like it's a strange entry point, and it's a strange journey that Ezra gets to go on right at the tail end of the show. Like 7 comes in and it pretty quickly feels like she's just part of the culture of that show, and she's in more episodes than Kess. So that really is a different feeling. And even Worf, like 4, 5, 6, 7, he's there and right in it. Like those are larger shifts in those shows than this is. This is a big one, but because it's confined to a single season, it's a different flavor and a different kind of thing to process. I really I think the closest thing to it really is, it's like I said at the beginning, in a show like Discovery, and some of the newer stuff, you get these like characters that you can say this is a character from season 2, like Captain Pike in season 2 of Discovery, or Captain Lorca in season 1 of Discovery. Like sort of isolated character arcs within one season. Ezri Dax is kind of the closest thing we get to that sort of thing.
What about the Doctor leaving in TNG in was it season?
Dr. Pulaski.
Season 3. Yeah, we get Pulaski instead of Crusher.
Yeah, that's maybe the closest thing to it, actually. Yeah, like that's sort of, and it's kind of a similar. It's different. It's different in a lot of ways too. They're two very different characters, Crusher and Pulaski, but it does offer this sort of this or that kind of element, like it's a either or kind of a choice in a similar way to Jadzia and Ezri, where it's kind of the same thing with Dr. Crusher. You get 6 seasons of Dr. Crusher and 1 of Pulaski, and it's the same thing with Jadzia and Ezri. So yeah, just Star Trek's a crazy thing, isn't it? Like all these weird parallels and things you can like
point to, and yeah,
you're like, wait a minute, that's curious. That's cool.
Yeah, I think that about does it. We're approaching that hour mark. That's usually our time. Call it. Had a great time talking about Ezri Dax. I think it was a very successful discussion. Definitely made me think about some things, but also it's fueled another conversation, which we hope to do with all of our topics. So I'm excited about that. I want to thank everybody in chat. You guys were awesome. You guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. Twitter and Discord, best 2 places to keep it going. I want to thank everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.